India will have its interim budget on the 1st of February. That's Thursday. Nirmala Sitharaman will present it, and a lot of expectations are built into it, despite the fact that it's an interim budget, because this is also an election year, which is why an interim budget and not a full budget is being presented. And today also the IMF has raised India's growth forecast for 2023-24. GDP is expected to grow by 6.7%, and it's saying that it reflects a resilience in domestic demand. To talk about it all, we have with us Rajat Kathuria, senior economist, Shiv Nadar University. Good evening to you, Rajat. What do you make of how India has been growing? Finance Ministry's data says 7+% for the last 3 years, and the IMF has revised its forecast for India as well for 23-24 to 6.7% now.
So I think, growth, the good news about growth forecasts, Gautam, is the fact that it's been revised upwards, which means India is moving in the right direction as far as growth is concerned. And we've maintained most of our forecasts internally have been in the neighborhood of 7%. And this has been reiterated by the Ministry of Finance, I think yesterday, that we're going to grow at about 7% plus. So that's the good news. I think in terms of overall rate of growth, India has been doing pretty well, and it's been a resilient economy ever since COVID subsided. So as far as growth is concerned, we've been doing quite well. I think the worry for India is the quality of the growth.
And this has happened despite Ukraine and the latest crisis in the Gulf as well.
So absolutely, despite the sort of headwinds that the global economy has been facing, the two wars that are happening even as we speak, the prices of commodities have been volatile. Even with those shocks, India's economy, as the IMF rightly says, has been shored up by domestic demand, and that will continue to remain so because we've got huge domestic demand. There's latent domestic demand, especially after COVID, and that has been reflected in the growth in services that we've been seeing. But as I said, the worry for India, I think for a long time, has been the quality of growth. And by that I mean it's not the number that is important for India, it's not even the aggregate sort of GDP target that we have in 2 years, which is $5 trillion, and I'm sure that we will achieve that. The worry for India has always been, and for the last decade and more, has been the quality of growth, which means that how is that growth distributed, and how are the jobs doing, and whether we've been able to create productive jobs for the number of people that have been sort of entering the labor force in India.
Yes, the ministry's report says that there's been positive movement on that front as well.
Yes. So there's been positive movement. So the quality of growth, I think, for India is important. And that means not only jobs, but it also means sustainability. It also means becoming more competitive. As far as sustainability and green growth is concerned, I think India is one of the few countries that has grown very rapidly as far as non-fossil fuel sort of take-up is concerned. Both solar and wind have been doing really well. But given the size of our economy, to expect that we will make a clean break from fossil fuels is not reasonable to expect, and it's, I think, not justified. So, but in terms of where we are headed, I think we are headed in the right direction. Our energy mix has changed in favor of non-fossil fuels. It'll take a lot of time to actually achieve the target that we want for ourselves and shore up the production of both sort of solar and wind. We are awaiting, the global economy technology transfer to happen and give us, storage technology that will make it affordable to produce and store non-fossil fuel.
Right. Now, are these the kind of issues that the finance minister will she have the leeway to address in the interim budget? Because it's not a full budget. It's not a full budget, and some say because it's an election year, there will be compulsion to increase social spending as well.
I think our social spending anyway is quite large. So India's social spending, given the fact that, we have a large number of people in the population that receive some sort of either direct transfers or receive some sort of in-kind subsidy. I think those numbers, despite the fact that it's an election year, I don't think those numbers are going to go down even after the election, given the demand for that is so much. So that will continue to remain. And in an election year, in an election budget, this is not a budget. This is, as you said, this is an interim budget. So I don't think we should expect much change in what we've been doing. The tax rates will not be changed in the interim budget. There will be a little more spending on social welfare schemes. There'll be a little more transfers that will be announced for people. But the real budget will be presented after the election. But given the fact that in the last few budgets, there's been a trajectory of increased investment by the public sector, and I think that is important. The public sector, over the next 5 years, and this I'm talking about the budget that will be presented after the election, I think we should see a move away from public sector to a private sector-led development trajectory. I think that is important. And the reason why the public sector investment, because private sector hasn't been coming in the face of all these shocks that have happened to the global economy, including what you mentioned.
Would you look for that? Would you look for that in the kind of fiscal consolidation path the FM chooses?
Of course. There will be a fiscal consolidation path, and which means that the government will not step away from investment unless the private sector comes forward. Because remember, investment is the trigger for growth. So we need, at the peak, we had 36% investment of GDP. Today we have about 30%, and we want to move back to 36%. And I think the private sector can lead the way for that. But for that, the private sector has to step up to the plate and make those investments, put its money where its mouth is. Then the government can withdraw from investment. The government will continue to invest in large infrastructure projects like roads and ports and railways. But then for the other investments, I think the private sector will need to come forward, both in its own way and in partnership with the government, which is the PPP mode, I think. But that will not happen. There will be no such announcements. I don't think there will be any such announcements in the interim budget. The interim budget, as you say, will be much more of a budget which will consolidate whatever already exists and try to guide a path towards, as you said, which is extremely important for fiscal prudence, which is fiscal consolidation.
So what would you look for in the interim budget, which will tell you that the finance minister has, got her eyes set on the long-term goal of taking India to becoming a 5 trillion economy within this decade, and then later on by 2030, $7 trillion, the third largest economy in the world?
I think those indications, Gautam, have already been there in the previous budgets, and that will be increased focus on fiscal consolidation. Now, shocks, of course, derail governments in their path towards fiscal consolidation. But the good news, I think, is that the tax regime is beginning to now bear fruit. Remember, there's an expenditure side, and there's also a revenue side. And the revenue side, fortunately for India, the GST, after the initial hiccups, we've seen that the GST has been able to generate revenue for the government. Direct taxes also, more and more people are coming under the tax net. And I think there will be some disinvestment that will be announced by the government. So on the revenue side for the government, it is more revenues through direct taxes, more revenues through GSTs, given that custom is no longer has tariffs already low, and I don't think customs revenue the government uses that for generating revenue. So it's pretty much indirect taxes, the GST, and the direct taxes. On the expenditure side, as I'm saying, there is some things that the government cannot but help do. Some of those subsidies that the government, some of the administrative expenses that the government has. But where the government can consolidate is that try and bring in the private sector, where it's been doing the heavy lifting for the economy for such a long time now, post-COVID. Government has been doing the heavy lifting, and government can withdraw and the private sector can come in, and then the government spending can be reduced and meet its fiscal consolidation target. So I think what the government is going to announce in the interim budget is a pathway towards fiscal consolidation, given the fact that it's been a long-standing sort of target for governments, different governments in India, that we must get to about 3% of fiscal deficit, 3% of GDP should be our target for fiscal deficit.
Yes, certainly. Now, Rajat Kathuria, you've already said that you don't see any scope for changes in tax slabs. So,
not in the interim budget. Not in the interim budget.
Yes. So, if that is not on the horizon, then is there any other area that you would look for where perhaps the government could give some sort of a break to put more cash in the hands of the common man?
That the government is already doing. I think, as I'm saying, that direct transfers, through Narega money is something that the government is already doing.
PM Kisan as well.
Yes, PM Kisan. So that the government is already doing, and necessarily so, because I think the government needs to play that role until we are able to create more sort of productive jobs. And one of the, I wouldn't say problems, one of the issues that is facing India's structural transformation is that manufacturing sector hasn't been able to create those large-scale jobs, those large-scale jobs that China or other East Asian countries did before us. We haven't been able to do that. We've been trying for a long, long time, saying that manufacturing should reach 25%. In the absence of the manufacturing sector creating large mass-scale jobs, where are people going to find employment? They are going to find employment in the services sector, which is what has happened. But most of this employment in the services sector, other than in the large companies, other than the formal sector and IT sector, most of them are not very productive jobs. And often people, do those jobs because they don't have an alternative. And
yes, for that the government has had PLI schemes coming in. A lot has been done for MSMEs as well to get them credit, easy credit.
Which is why the SME sector, which is the single largest job creator, we have 63 million plus MSMEs in the country, and a lot of them are small. So that's where jobs can be created. So the MSMEs need a boost, and the government has been doing that. So it has just reinforced what it has already been doing. But doing business, making it easier for firms to start up, etc., those are important. The gig economy is also picked up. There are a lot of people who are employed in the gig economy. I can't tell you the numbers off the top of my head, but these sort of gig workers across different sectors, retail comes to mind, transport comes to mind, delivery comes to mind. These are some things that are happening. These jobs were not there before, and these jobs have picked up in the last 4 or 5 years, given that digital economy in India is doing quite well. Of course, a lot more needs to be done. But, the nature of the jobs in the past used to be mass-scale manufacturing jobs. And nature of those jobs in India is likely to change. But I still think that the heavy lifting for job creation will have to be done by the manufacturing sector. And as you rightly said, MSMEs will have to do the heavy lifting in that regard.
Let's see what can be done about that in terms of giving the MSMEs and others also a helping hand in the interim budget. Not much scope for it, but one can always, hope that there would be.
Thank you. We should look at the next, the budget.
Yes, a few months down the line. All right.
Yes.
Thank you, Rajat, for joining us and talking about it.